It's very difficult to follow up from a speech by Adi Stanchu because he sets the bar so high. As you probably notice, I'm English, which is why I hope you will give me the benefit for the fact that after 12 years, I still cannot speak Romanian. I understand it, bine, citesc bine, but vorbesc prost. Rău prost. I'm grateful to Adi for inviting me here because we have worked together on a couple of specific cultural change situations which I want to talk to you about, and they have been successful. One came to a very successful conclusion. The other is still a work in progress, but I think, as you will see, there are very good signs that it's going to be successful. As Adi says, I define success by the capital gain that I make for my investors. As Adi said, we have been here, GED, now for the last 12 years. Initially, we were invited by the EBRD and the European Union to manage a fund, the Romanian Post-Privatization Fund, which was a 44 million euro fund. And in '96, I came over and I had to find people, I had to find offices, I had to find deals. And over those 10 years that first fund was underway, we looked at something in the region of 550 different investment propositions, obviously not all at the same depth of analysis. Of those, we invested in 12 companies, some of which you know, like Arctic, Continental Hotels, Adesco, PCNet, and some smaller companies which you might not know, Vital Gas, which was a gas company, Advantage Software Factory, Romaya. And we were sufficiently successful, which involved some luck, being in the right place at the right time, but also a lot of hard work to hand back to our investors something in the region of 110 million euros on the basis of their 44 million euro initial investment. So that track record of, after 10 years, more or less multiplying by 2.5 the investment, allowed us to raise another fund, which we call GED Eastern Fund 2, which is now 150 million euros, and which we're investing not only in Romania, but in Bulgaria and neighboring countries. And we have already invested in 5 companies, of which I'm going to be talking about one today. So I'm going to be talking about cultural change within the context of, is there a way of getting a handle on the value that cultural change can create? Before doing that, I'd just like to ensure that I'm talking to people who understand what private equity is. Is there somebody who can help me with a definition on what private equity is? There's a host of hands here, which shows that probably I'm going to have to do it myself. So private equity investment is the purchase by the investment fund of shares in a company. In other words, we're not banks, we're not lending money, we're actually investing in the capital of the company. Normally, we take controlling interests of the company, not always. In the first fund, we took minority interests. In the second fund, we're more normally taking majority controlling interests. And we hold those shares for 4 or 5 years before selling them in order to obtain a capital gain. Now, some of you may have seen that private equity in some countries is regarded as little more than parasitic. In fact, some of the a German politician has been going around calling us locusts. I like to think of myself not as a locust, and the reason is that a good private equity investor adds value to the investment by becoming involved in the board of the companies at the strategic level to produce change. Private equity has got a bad name recently because there have been financial engineers who have been making investments, who the only thing they did was that they invested some capital, raised a lot of debt from the banks, in good times paid off the debt, and therefore increased the value of the investment through the fact that having invested 3 on a company that was valued at 10, if they paid off the debt with 7, then by definition they've tripled their money. That's an easy game when everything goes well. When things don't go well and you can't pay off the debt, then situations like Enron occur. But that's not the private equity that we do. The private equity we do is the old phrase of 90% perspiration and 10% inspiration. That's the way that we create value. Okay? So we are value investors helping to create that value. And a huge part of that, especially in Eastern Europe, is in cultural change. And I'll explain why. The first company that I'm going to talk about was, as you will see, our most successful investment, but it was also by far our most difficult investment. Then I'm also going to be talking about a company which we have in our new fund called Phonomat, which is a company in which we are deeply involved in the change of the culture of 5 different companies which we have integrated into one. So to talk about Phonomat, to Sicomed. Sicomed, as you probably all know, was the old state-owned pharmaceutical manufacturer in Bucharest. It was privatized in a management and employee buyout, so 70% of the company was owned by the management and the employees to a greater or lesser extent, and the other 30% to the CIFs, or initially they were known as the POFs. A huge company which in typical old-style management was, as Adi mentioned, command and control. This company was run effectively, although it was a company with over 2,000 employees, it was run by one person, the president. Okay? And what the president wanted was what the company did. Or that's what he hoped would occur. In fact, very often, what the president wanted, the company didn't do, because there wasn't enough of a motivated and properly rewarded middle management to ensure that what he wanted, in fact, was what the company would do. So, necessarily, as part of the European Union integration process, the pharmaceutical industry had to take in its own hands a change in the way that it operated. To a great extent, this was because it needed to obtain good manufacturing practice certification. That meant that the factories had to completely be renovated, a huge capital expenditure, in order to meet European certification and to allow the pharmaceutical industry to export and even to continue selling in Romania. So legislation was put into place, and the companies, all companies, had to obtain GMP certification. This needed a significant increase in capital in order to bring about this capex. And although Sicomed, like most of the large companies, was a publicly quoted company, the stock market was just not in a position to ensure that they could raise the money through a public placement. So they had to come to a private equity firm, GED in this case, to obtain the money needed for the capital expenditure. So that was how we entered. We took, along with another fund, a Greek fund, Global Finance, we subscribed capital and between us took a 51% controlling shareholding in Sicomed. And then we realized what we had bought. A company which, from almost any way you measured it, was old-fashioned, out of date, no systems. It had one PC for 2,000 people. This was the year 2000. Okay. We had to do everything. And initially we started doing it wrong. We brought in managers who were used to this command and control type of management. We thought that it would be best to bring somebody in who was in some senses familiar to the organization in the way that they led, in the way that they looked at that organization. Big mistake. The company went from bad to worse. The management started having considerable communication difficulties with the Ministry of Health. Tension was created with the Ministry of Health. Big changes had to occur, such as we had to change the supplier of the ampoules, which is one of Sicomed's major products, the glass ampoules, because the Romanian supplier was not up to good manufacturing practice standards. We had to change to a foreign supplier, which increased our cost by a factor of 3. It tripled the cost of ampoules, and the Ministry of Health wouldn't allow us to increase prices to recover that cost. So for every ampoule that Sicomed made, and it made 2 million per day, we lost money as it went out the door. The first managers who we brought in were managers who confronted the Ministry of Health. And as the Americans say, you do not fight City Hall. Okay. So we eventually came to the mutual agreement that we had to change managers, and we brought in a team led by Klaas Postema, a Dutch manager who had been in the pharmaceutical industry, was a pharmacist, is a pharmacist, and he started making all of the necessary changes with Addy's help, Addy and his team, and a very good HR manager. And we started doing all of the things that Addy has been talking about from a conceptual point of view. We started enabling the company to measure the type of culture that it had. We started putting in systems to enable the company to measure how, to what extent people were motivated. We put in new systems of grading people, of setting up salary grids, providing variable systems of remuneration so that if they achieved objectives, they got a higher gross remuneration than their colleagues in the same grid, but who were less effective. And we started doing the most difficult thing, which is breaking down this barrier of command and control. What the boss says, I will do without question. Okay? That is by far the most difficult part of this change, the management of change. As Adi says, everybody around the world with these grids, they all define what they want. That's not the difficult part. Everybody knows what good management is in a conceptual sense. It's how to implement it, which is the difficult thing. There's a phrase that the Americans sometimes used to use before so-called re-engineering, which is, if it's not broken, don't touch it. Okay? Now the new phrase is, if it's not broken, break it. Because they're so radical are these changes in order to bring about something which goes from that left-hand column to the right-hand column, that the top management, and that includes the private equity investor, have to be prepared to take a risk that things will go worse before they get better. And if they are not prepared to take that risk, then there's not going to be enough push to make the change. I think leadership, as you will see this afternoon, to me is the absolute key to this, because there has to be a coherent message all the way down the organization. It has to come from the boss. I don't know whether any of you were in the talk a couple of weeks ago that Jack Welch gave. Jack Welch obviously is the paragon of change management, how he changed General Electric to an organization which reflected his personal belief of how an organization should be run. That's hundreds of thousands of companies. I used to give an MBA class here in Bucharest, and I would ask my students, would it have been possible for Jack Welch to do in Romania what he did in the States? We used to have a huge discussion about it, because it's not clear that the sort of management style and culture created by Jack Welch in GE would have been acceptable to the Romanian management, to the Romanian workforce. Okay? So it's not just what the leader wants, it's what the leader can do with the assets, the human assets, and the organizational structures which are possible within this environment. So it's not one size fits all. Klaus Postimer believed very much in what you might call consensus management. Consensus management obviously doesn't just mean not doing anything until everybody agrees. You have to set strict timelines, you have to set strict objectives, but what you need to do, and what he believed in, was to get buy-in by the whole organization. So there was a good deal of communication, and there was much more information sharing than is the case normally in Romania. My experience, having been here 12 years, is that people still believe that information is power. Therefore, the less you share it, the more powerful you can become. Big mistake. Big mistake. And especially when you're trying to change a whole organization, everybody needs to know at every level why you're doing it, how you intend doing it, how you intend measuring the results of doing it. And that's what Klaus was particularly good at. Klaus was very good at communicating at different levels of the organization. Obviously, when you're trying to produce a change of that type, if you're going to produce a coherent structure, you're going to have to accept that there will be some people who feel comfortable in the old organization, who don't feel comfortable in the new organization, and not feeling comfortable are not going to work. And you have to accept, as part of this management of change, that you're going to have to let people go. What did we do in Sicomed? We set up a program of outplacement so that even though we reduced the workforce from 2,000 to less than 1,000, over 80% of the non-skilled, relatively low-educated workforce we found other jobs for before they left our payroll. What did that do? First of all, it gave a strong message that we cared about people. And secondly, it gave a clear message that not only do we care about people, but we are going to assist those people to move on. That this is not a punishment, but this is a recognition on our part and on their part, hopefully, that the new organization, the new way of doing things, is not going to suit everybody. There are some people who really feel much better in command and control situations because they don't have to take decisions. They don't have to accept responsibility. Because the good thing about command and control is that the responsibility is up the top. And if you do what you're asked to do, if they say jump, you're already up in the air before you say how high, then there's very little, in some senses, it's a more comfortable way of being. But in the long term, it's much less fulfilling, much less rewarding, obviously. Some people in Sicomed, and some people in every organization in which you're involved, are going to feel more comfortable with the old way of doing things. Once you've measured the degree of comfort that they have with the sort of technology that Adi and other consultants have, then you have to be prepared to take the necessary steps and draw the necessary conclusions. And that's what we did. The remuneration system in Sicomed was absolutely crazy. The longer you had been in the organization, the more you were paid, irrespective of to what extent you were doing a good job. Just didn't work. Was not a way of measuring and motivating people. So we had to scrap all of that. Okay. This was there were a series of measures, therefore, within this Sicomed situation that as private equity investors, we were deeply involved as board members. In fact, I took on the presidency of the company for over 2 years in order to push through this change and to support Klaus Postema, the managing director, in what he was doing. Because the message had to be absolutely clear and coherent from the top. This is what's going to be done. If you're with us, we will support you, we will train you. We did lots of trainings and team buildings. We even took all of middle management, I remember, to Rome for 3 days, 30 people, in which we were sending them rushing around Rome on team spirits. I don't know, Adi, you were involved with that, yes. And it created such a core of motivated people that when we eventually sold Sicomed to Zentiva, one of the reasons that they gave for buying the company, apart from the fact that it had good brands, apart from the fact that it had a large market share, was the group of skilled, motivated, talented Romanian managers. That was why they valued the company. When we invested in 2000, the stock market valued Sicomed at 20 million. When we sold it, Zentiva valued it at 200 million, 5 years later. Now, as Adi says, to what extent is that value creation due to the cultural change? To what extent is it the fact that the company had in its portfolio Algo Camin and other important brands? To what extent is that it's got a not very gleaming, but at least a new factory with good manufacturing practice? I would say at least a third, a third, a third. Okay, this is not rocket science, but they, in the negotiations that we had with Zentiva, they were very clear in their own mind that as the top management was leaving, as the controlling shareholders were leaving, they were still below a very motivated, very cohesive team of Romanian specialists, and they had been produced through this cultural change. The amazing thing is, I hope we don't have any press in here. Do we have press here? Okay. I'll tell you later what the amazing thing is afterwards. But if you look at the way that Sicomed is now organized and structured, it's much more the command and control silo system that there was back in 2000 than it was when we sold it. Yep.
Câți au fost în incapacitatea de a schimba ceva la ei, adică ceva ce ține de verbul a fi, și câți de verbul a face?
Yeah. Okay. For those who didn't hear, and just to ensure that I understood the question, basically of the 1,200 or so who we let go, what percentage do I think were unwilling to change? What percentage were unable to change? And what percentage were neither unwilling nor unable, but just had to go because they were not capable of doing their job? I would say probably in the region of 60% was that third phase, that they were just not capable of doing the job that we were asking of them. And it was really irrelevant whether they were willing or capable of making a change, because they were at a level where that really wasn't the issue. The issue was, can they do the job that we're asking of them? That's not an organizational issue, that's just a technical issue. But the other 40% were at a level where they could and should have understand the benefits of the change in the management system that we were doing. Of those, probably, of that 40%, perhaps 30%, okay, in other words, 3/4 were unable to make the change, and perhaps up to 10% were unwilling to make the change, even though they were able to do so.
Ai spus 60% au plecat pentru că nu erau capabili să facă jobul.
Yep.
În spatele oricărui lucru pe care îl facem stă incapacitatea noastră de a fi, de fapt, parte din lucrul respectiv. Crezi că puteai să întorci ceva din cei 60%?
Obviously, it sounds hard that one takes decision that somebody can't do a job which they already have been doing. And obviously, it is the obligation of management to try to train a person to do a job in the way that management is asking of them. It's not fair, nor it would be sending out a good message to the rest of the organization if somebody were fired merely because they were perceived as being a bad worker. You have to give them a chance. I always say to my people in GED, our professionals, I say, one mistake is a learning experience. 2 mistakes of the same kind is negligent. 3 mistakes of the same kind is a good reason for preparing your CV. Okay? So it's a question of giving people a chance. The biggest problem that there is in all of this cultural change, especially in Romania, especially, I wouldn't say Romania, Eastern Europe, ex-communist countries is the question of trust. Okay? If you're going to delegate, if you're going to empower all of these words which are the new buzzwords, you have to be able to trust people. But equally importantly, people need to trust themselves. People need to have the self-confidence to be prepared to accept delegation, to accept responsibility, to accept empowerment. Okay? And some people do not have that level of self-confidence, even though they are capable of doing it. Now, good HR management has the obligation to find those people and not push them out the door. Okay? That's where the team buildings, the assessment centers, we push through something in the region of 70 middle managers through assessment centers, 2-day assessment centers, where they're role-playing, where they're doing different things, so we could get a view of those middle managers in situations in which they were unfamiliar. You have to, when you're judging somebody, before you let them go, or before you promote them, or before you set them new objectives, you have to see them operating in conditions in which they're unfamiliar, where they are uncomfortable. Because it's there that you can really see to what extent they are capable of changing.
Mulțumesc.
Okay. Any other questions on the Sicomed case before I move on to Phonomat? What we did? Yeah.
So if I understood you correctly, you were placing something like 1/3 of this gain on cultural change, right? That would put it on 60 million, if I'm correct.
Yep.
What was your investment for that? I keep getting this question from people, you know.
Yes.
How much do you need to put in to get this out?
Well, obviously there were two types of investment. There's the direct, measurable euro investment in the consultants that we used, in perhaps the team buildings, the assessment centers, all of that. That is obviously in the hundreds of thousands. Might not even get to 150,000 euros. The other is in the opportunity cost of doing all of this, which is the amount of management time which is dedicated to all of these processes of communication, of consensus building, of measurement, and that still is no more than hundreds of thousands of dollars. So there is a real, substantial, significant, and geometrically greater return to this type of process of cultural change if it's done properly. But it's not easy. It's a very, very difficult thing. And again, I stress that it can only come from the top. However, the first spark can be lit in the middle of the organization. There are many, many top managers, leaders, who, because they're so immersed in the day-to-day problems, that if they can be shown by a middle manager that there is a new way, that it is possible, that middle manager, in fact, can be the spark that ignites this leadership change. But it's impossible for cultural change to occur from middle management downwards. It has to occur from the top down. Okay. Okay. I'll move on to Phonomat.
Încă o întrebare, dacă se poate. Aici sunt.
Yep.
Ok. Întâmplarea face că l-am cunoscut pe domnul Clas Postema și el este într-adevăr un foarte bun comunicator. Ce garanții se iau înaintea unui asemenea proces de transformare culturală că liderul pe umerii căruia
cade sarcina transformării, este purtătorul acestor calități de schimbare. Trece și el printr-un sistem de evaluare în ce măsură poate să devină un driver doar pentru că este pus în fruntea unei schimbări?
There is no guarantee. As I said, the initial choice that we made of a managing director for Sicomed was the wrong choice. So we lost really, I would say, almost a year in a 5-year process through the fact we had made the wrong choice of managing director. Unfortunately, this is not a science. The evaluation of people and their capacities to undertake radical change is an art. And unfortunately, I have, over the 35 years I've been in private equity, I've made more mistakes in choosing people than I've been right. Luckily, when I have been right, it's paid for all the mistakes. But my neck is still on the block. Clearly, there are leaders who talk the talk, but then they don't walk the walk. The good leader realizes that this is sufficiently complex a process that expert external assistance is always necessary. Okay, on Phonomat, we're doing the same. Very different type of operation. Here what we have done, this is with our new fund, we've invested something in the region of now 11, or it soon will be 11 million euros, in buying 5 different GSM operators, all under the Orange operating brand, and merging them together into one, which is now the leading Orange operator. We rebranded those 5 companies to Phonomat. Some of you may have seen the first TV advert that we put on recently. So there is an absolute and complete change. We hired in from New York, actually Spanish, but he was in New York at that time, a retail specialist, to drive through the change, the integration that was needed there. Everything had to be changed. The company had 5 different accounting systems, put in one accounting system. It had totally different ways within those 5 companies of remunerating the sales force in the shops. That had to be changed. People had to understand that now they were working not for Das Impex or RT Plus, but for Phonomat. So we had to have, and we are having, team buildings to get people to understand what the new values are, what the new vision is for this chain, and what our common objectives are. Our common objectives are to sell more, but also at a higher margin, and most importantly, with a level of quality of service to the customer which is higher than the competition. So at the end of each period, we want secret customers to go in to our stores and to the stores of competition and come out and say, we were served better. We had a higher quality experience in a Phonomat store than we did in Germanos or in EuroGSM or whomever. That's the most difficult part of this, is to drive through a 500 employee organization the idea of quality service. Very difficult in a situation where the retail environment before was a question of if you want it, you do what I say. It was a supply-driven economy, not a demand economy. In a supply-driven economy in retail, is pure order taking. You want it, you do it on my terms, in my way, and at my speed. That's no longer the case. So there's a huge change in mental set that has to occur. And that's what we're working in Phonomat on. We already believe that just the process of integration, just the process of building teams, getting them to understand that each shop manager has their own little profit and loss account and are remunerated on the basis of certain profit objectives. They're their own little business person. They're their own little entrepreneur. This in itself, after 2 years, we believe has doubled the value of our company. Okay. On top of that, then we have the rebranding, we have the market position. But again, a very significant part of the value creation which we are doing in Phonomat is the cultural change reflected in an organizational change.
I don't know if you believe that people are leaving managers, not companies. And you said that you try to change the loyalty of people from the owner to the company and brand. I do believe you can get attached to a certain brand, but how did you succeed in making people making this move from commitment to the owner to commitment to the company?
Yes, that's a good question, thank you. It's an absolute key to private equity investment, especially, that when we move on and move out, the purchaser is buying a going concern, which has a future, which has a future of profitable growth. Now, again, by definition, being a private equity investment, we normally bring in our own top management who leaves with us because we motivate them very highly and we remunerate them very highly so that their objectives and their time horizons are the same as ours, so they leave. So it is absolutely vital for us that the middle management who are going to stay are loyal to the entity and not the president who's leaving or the managing director who's leaving. That is this whole process of defining a culture, creating a culture so that it's not just the one man. The one man has been the catalyst for the change, has been the reason for its success, but the culture is the entity's culture, it's not the person's culture. Okay? So there's an absolutely basic part of value creation and value maintenance for the purchasers.
The fact that, do you think you'll have difficulties in changing people's perception on our loyalty to the company and brand, taking into account the fact that you are not selling Phonomat services? So you speak about service quality, but you're selling Orange services.
Yes, it's a very difficult process to get people to change their loyalties from what they've been used to what is now the case. I remember back in the late 60s when I joined Ford Motor Company in the UK, they had just merged Ford of Britain and Ford of Germany to the Ford of Europe headquarters. And there were literally fights in the corridor between the Ford of Germany people and the Ford of England people, reliving the war, but also to the fact that the Ford of Germany people thought that the Ford of Germany way of doing things was much better than the Ford of Britain way, and vice versa. So we have had Obviously, we took some people from each of the companies to put them into the Bucharest headquarters. And for the first 6 months, people were still talking about, I'm a DAS Impex person, or I'm an RT Plus person, or I'm a Plus GSM person. And this about Phonomat sounds good, but prove it to us. And it's only after a lot of work, a lot of getting people to work together, deliberately taking people from one part of the organization and putting them into the other part of the organization so that they were dealing with new people, breaking up, if you like, little cadres of friends who had come from the same organization, that we have now, I think, got people who understand that the Phonomat company, the Phonomat brand, the Phonomat way of doing things is much better than what they brought as a legacy from their previous company.